One of the things that I really find fascinating is that finding light is not the necessary piece. The act of looking for light, that's when the change has already happened. Just the fact that I'm looking for light changes my heart. I use that gift of choice to walk forward. I become an agent unto myself. And that's when change can occur.
Hey guys, it's Seth, and welcome to another episode of Forward. Now, in today's episode, I had the opportunity to interview Nate Mitchell. Now, I say I had the opportunity to interview Nate Mitchell, but Nate's actually, I work with him. He's right next door. In fact, he could very well be overhearing this recording right now. He is the co-director of Anasazi Foundation. Anasazi Foundation is a wilderness therapy program for youth at risk. And it's a program that I have been associated with in one form or another since 2007. And in my early 20s, I was really struggling with life, and I had the opportunity to work at Anasazi Foundation. And what I learned there was really transformative for me. And so a little while ago, I had the opportunity again to sit down with Nate Mitchell and talk about some of the principles that are taught at Anasazi Foundation. And I wanted to share a significant portion of that interview with you. In this one, we talk about really what I think is key, which is the gift of choice, and our inherent power to choose, regardless of what our circumstances might be. Now, at the end of the interview, I'll actually talk about some of my key takeaways. But now let's just go to the interview. So, Nate, I wanted to thank you for agreeing to sit down with me for this interview. A lot of people are really anxious right now because of things going on in the world. And from my perspective, I think Anasazi is uniquely positioned to share some thoughts and some inspiration and some advice, and that may be helpful to people who are feeling really anxious. But before we get into that, could you describe to me what Anasazi Foundation is and your role at Anasazi?
Sure. Anasazi Outdoor Behavioral Healthcare is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We provide therapeutic services in the wilderness for at-risk youth. So it's a wilderness therapy for young adults and for teens who are having some struggles in their lives of all different varieties. From substance abuse problems to depression, anxiety. But I would say one of the main things that all of the folks that come to the program, something they all have in common is struggles in their family relationships, which turns out to be, to a large part, the medicine that they need is the strength in those relationships. And so that's kind of our main strength, and our measure of success is how do we do at healing and strengthening those relationships. Because there will be difficulties that people run into because of our limitations and our just the chaos that we encounter in our lives. But if we have a relationship that's intact, especially a family relationship, we'll work it out. We'll get through it. We'll make something good out of that difficult time because of that connection. And so we don't measure success by perfection. We measure success by connection.
Describe the Anasazi program itself. What happens when a person is admitted into the program? What is it that they experience?
Oh yeah, sure.
Because I think it's relevant to our conversation.
The experience at Anasazi is really pretty intense. It's a minimum of 7 weeks stay, and it's all out in the wilderness. And it's what you would call a nomadic program, meaning that they go from one rendezvous point to the next rendezvous point throughout the week.
In the wilderness.
Out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And it's very minimalist, the amount of gear that they get to take with them. For example, they don't have a backpack. They have some other gear, and we teach them how to roll it up and tie it up in such a way that they can strap it onto their back. They don't have a tent. They get a tarp, and we teach them how to make a shelter if it's going to rain. They don't have a lighter or matches. If they want to make a fire to cook with or what have you, then they need to learn how to make friction fire, which everybody at Anasazi has to learn how to make friction fire. So there's a deep purpose to the ways and the reasons that we teach those ways. And they all have to do with connection in some way. So that's part of the intensity of the program is the natural walking on the land and the connections with the people that are with you while you're doing that activity.
You know, one of the reasons I wanted you to illustrate what the trail and the program really is like is because of how much we use that language of walking and hiking and living and experiencing and climbing mountains in the wilderness. How much we use that language and bring it into life. Yeah. I guess the real world and what we're experiencing. So those difficulties, those relationships, or those work troubles or conditions in the world at large, we often talk about them in terms of the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And we'll say, like, this is like climbing a mountain, right? This is like a really hard week on the trail. This is like that time when it was a monsoon and it just seemed like nothing was going to get better. And then the sun came out and everything was dry within 2 or 3 hours, you know. I needed that background of what the program was because of how critical that language is to what the experiences we want to share with our listeners and our viewers. You have often talked about the concept of looking for light. And you'll talk about the trail and how sometimes on the trail it's dark and you're not able to find your way when it's dark. And so then you've shared some insights that you've learned about looking for light. Could you elaborate more on that idea of looking for light?
Sure. Yeah. Looking for light is almost like a mantra for me sometimes that I need to remember to look for light, because I'm prone, like everybody else, to only see the darkness. And sometimes, and maybe this is like a natural tendency that we have when we notice darkness. And the metaphor would be like walking into a room and there's darkness in there. So you grab your broom and you try to sweep out all the darkness. And you go to the darkest corner that you could find and try to sweep out that darkness. And you work really hard to do that. And it doesn't work. And then all you see is more and more and more dark because you want to get in there and get rid of it, right? In the 7 Paths book, well, one of the paths is the path of light. And in there, it talks about how every day nature teaches us a really valuable and simple lesson about light. And that is this truth, that light chases away darkness. In our lives, when we experience darkness and we allow ourselves to pay attention to our feelings, and we know that we want to get rid of that darkness, sometimes we try to chase that darkness away with something that's just a little bit less dark. Or we think that by focusing on that darkness somehow, that will chase it away. Well, there's only one thing that chases away darkness. And the reason that that's true is because darkness isn't really a thing. It's only a word that we have to describe a lack of something else. if you understand that darkness in your life is only a description of a lack of something else, and the thing that you're lacking is light, it makes it really simple to think about things in terms of how do I look for that light. When you feel like you're lost to despair, focusing on that despair never really been a recipe for making things better. And sometimes looking for light is as simple as finding meaning in a difficult time. Out on the trail, I've seen people experiencing really difficult things. There's almost nothing about being out in the wilderness in that mode that's easy or comfortable. But I've seen groups of young people in circumstances where they have every excuse to feel sorry for themselves and to be truly miserable. And I've walked in and I've seen them with smiles on their faces and singing songs and telling jokes to each other. I've seen the opposite too. In our lives, when you experience that kind of darkness, those kinds of excuses, you can hear your own voice saying, well, it was the storm that made me angry. I'm experiencing this misery because of that circumstance that's happening to me. But there's a principle that we teach out on the trail that we call the gift of choice. And each one of us in every circumstance has this opportunity to choose. We can choose when we're soaking and wet and cold. We can choose to be miserable, or we can choose to find some meaning, some joy. And one of the interesting things is, because I've experienced that a few times and I've had a chance to talk to the people who went through that, because I'm just blown away. Because if it was me, I would be really feeling sorry for myself. That's what I do. Yeah. But these people are just joyful about it. And I get to ask them why and how that happened. And only in that like the process of really digging into that, did they start to teach themselves this principle that when I walk forward, when I use my gift of choice to walk forward, I act instead of being acted upon. And it's the same with relationships too. When you find yourself in any sort of unfavorable circumstance, we still have that fundamental choice of acting or being acted upon. And that's the difference between walking forward and walking backward, and looking for darkness or looking for light. One of the things that I really find fascinating is that finding light is not the necessary piece. The act of looking for light, that's when the change has already happened. Just the fact that I'm looking for light changes my heart. I use that gift of choice to walk forward. I become an agent unto myself. And that's when change can occur. At Anasazi, we have this ceremony that's called a blanket stepping. And in this ceremony, there's an old blanket that's laid out on Mother Earth, as Ezekiel says, and a crow hop away, there's a new blanket. This ceremony represents having a new beginning. When we sit on the old blanket, we talk about the things that are in the physical part of our experience. When a trail walker is having that ceremony with a young walker, a young person, they're both sitting together on the old blanket because they both need to have a new beginning. The invitation that they receive is specific, and it's important in a couple of different ways. the one part of the invitation is thinking about the stuff in the physical world that you're that's not helping you to walk forward, right? And that you would be willing to leave behind. And think about those two criteria. Because what we don't say is things that are causing you to walk backwards, or things that are hurting you or harming you, or bad stuff that's in your life. Just think about it. Make this mental list in your mind about the things that are not helping you to walk forward. You're on this journey and you have to carry everything with you. If there's extra stuff in there that's not helping you to walk forward, why would you carry it around, right? So that's a different list. And then think about the things that you're willing to leave behind. Not the things that you're ready to change, or that you need to fix, or that you have to make different. All that's required is your willingness. So when I experience that darkness, and I think about that blanket stepping, I think about a new beginning, I choose in those moments. And sometimes, like I mentioned before, sometimes if I'm honest with myself, I'm not willing to leave that behind yet. I'm not willing to leave behind the anger. I'm not willing to leave behind the pride or any of those things. As stupid as it sounds, those are kind of my reality in the moment. But when I can see things clearly, I become more and more willing to leave those things behind. The thing that makes me, the difference, right, between staying stuck and being even just a little bit willing to leave those things behind, is never inside of me. It's always, I always find it in somebody else. The example, the humanity, the beauty and truth that I see in somebody else. That's what makes that difference, that tipping point between my determination to stay stuck and to let some things go.
You mentioned the act of walking forward is what brings light into your life. And I mean, just recently, I as soon as you said that, I thought of what's happening right now with the pandemic, the coronavirus, and the economic troubles that are going with it. I left work not long after it was declared a pandemic, because my immediate thought was my family, and I got to make sure everyone's okay. And how do I do that? I've got 3 kids, basically, 3, 2, and 1. Like, those are their ages, right? And so I got to stock up on all of the diapers, which everybody else is doing that, yeah. And so I'm already feeling incredibly anxious for my family, and my wife at the same time was insistent that we consider foster care, And I'm thinking, okay, Kim, there's a pandemic going on right now. The economy is tanking. We need to get diapers. I can't get more diapers for another child right now. This is just too much.
They better come with their own diapers.
And so I was feeling very anxious, but if I've learned something from Anasazi, it's that hope comes as you move forward. And so we opened up our home to another foster child. We don't know how long this child will stay with us. It's always indefinite, you never know. But I can tell you that the moment we brought her home, there's a pandemic going around, and there's all of these anxieties and all of these struggles, all of these different concerns and fears going on outside of the walls of our home. But the moment we did that and walked forward and brought her into our home, that will remain one of the sweetest experiences of hope that I've ever felt in my life. And there's meaning in that. There's meaning in that. There's meaning that comes from walking forward, and those are things that I learned here at Anasazi. And like you said, if people are struggling to find meaning and hope and faith, the best thing that we can encourage is to walk forward as far as they're able, and then a little bit further.
Then a little bit further. It sounds like in that example, it sounds like light found you. That happens sometimes. And we have to be willing to receive it.
Well, yeah, so that was a little bit of a personal story from my life. We ended there, but some of the key takeaways that I really appreciated from this interview with Nate was when he spoke about our relationships with our family being the medicine that we typically need. When we're struggling in life, it seems to always be in association with a relationship that's not doing so well, and it's when we work on that relationship, when we strengthen that relationship, when we find resolution in that relationship, that's actually the medicine that we typically need, and I found that to be very profound. The other takeaway I really appreciated was when he spoke about the blanket stepping and being willing to put something down, to leave something behind, leave things behind that weren't helping you to walk forward, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Like, in my life right now, I am really attuned to politics and news. I like it. It's fascinating for me. But this political cycle has been particularly dark and contentious. And I have found that it's not really helping me to move forward, to be super invested in it. It's good for me to be informed. Of course it is. But it's actually detrimental for me and my progress to be hyper invested. I have the tendency to become somewhat obsessed with what's happening in the political world, and I have no real influence other than to say that there's this and this thing that I don't like, or this and this thing that I do like, and it would be far more beneficial for me and my family if I were walking forward in projects that I know I have some influence and power in, and helping my family and serving my community. So I found that to be really beneficial. And then of course the part I think I really liked, that really resonated with me, which is why I opened with the clip, was the act of looking for light, just simply looking for light, actually changes you, right? It brings hope into your life, and that is something that I have tested and I've found to be true over and over and over again. That when we look for light, we look for hope, we find it. We most certainly find it. And so that is something that I would encourage you to do as you finish this podcast, that you go out and you look for light, and you encourage that light, and you help grow that light, add more light to that. And in that way, I think we can all really and truly move forward. Thank you again for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends and family. And above all, have faith and keep moving forward.